is an idea, so alien, so subversive, that it turns our view of the world on its head. It may underpin the most dramatic changes you'll see in your lifetime, but you've probably never even heard of it. It's called accelerationism. It is controversial, challenging, and unsettling.
We are not necessarily in control of the things that happen to us, just being in the world. Something else is kind of puppeteering how we think and feel about the world.
It has evolved over centuries in response to modernity and its engine, capitalism.
You can find many precursors of accelerationist thought going all the way back to the dawn of modernity, really, when people began to understand that they were caught up in processes which they weren't really in control of.
It reveals something vital about the future.
Maybe the end of the road for humans is going to come before we can find a way outside of capitalism.
It's capitalism that's going to end the world, and we all know it.
In a way, it may even be a view from the future.
We're increasingly unable to make sense of the world we're living in on the basis of what went before, and therefore possibly a new model of time is required in order for us to inhabit the world that we're in. Maybe we need to be understanding it from the future rather than on the basis of the past.
Humanity, the 21st century. A technological capitalist utopia, centuries in the making. The pinnacle of human existence to date. Order any product at the touch of a finger. Share your life with people on the other side of the planet. Instantly acquire any fact or fiction. Your TV knows what you want to watch before you do. Your car will drive itself as you enjoy the view. Algorithms preempt your desires. Everything is available right now. Instant noodles. Instant gratification. Instagram. Everything is consumable. And it's not stopping there.
And things are getting better.
The future promises even more. More efficiency, more connectivity, more speed. Everything is absolutely wonderful.
What is capitalism?
I think one of the easiest ways to understand capitalism is to contrast it with an institution that is often confused with capitalism, which is the market. And markets are institutions which allow people to engage in active exchange. So you've got more bread than you need, I've got more money than I need, and we meet in the middle and we trade. Now, after people have an exchange in a marketplace, they both go away pretty much as equals in some sense. The difference of capitalism is the presence, as the name suggests, of capital. And capital is something quite unusual and quite extraordinary. It refers to entities, whether they be pieces of technology, whether they be financial assets, or even, according to some theorists, human beings themselves, in which it's possible to make investment and to extract a return on that investment which is greater than the original investment.
It's an alternative to something like feudalism, right, which is a system we used to have. One, that most people are forced to survive through wage labour, right? That's workers, right? One feature of capitalism, workers. The other feature is that the ways in which resources are allocated and invested in society, right, within the mode of production and the means of production itself, are fundamentally guided by private individuals, capitalists, on the basis of capital accumulation. It's this accretion of value through profit.
The reason that growth happens is that there is the input of labour. There are certain people who are contributing more value into the productive process than they are being paid for. And it is that difference between what you pay the labourer and the amount of profit that the capitalist is able to withdraw from their investment that is what makes capitalism a uniquely exploitative system.
And capitalism exploits more than just humans.
"2 million years human species has been on the planet. 200,000 years Homo sapiens. It's just these last 200 years, the Industrial Revolution, powered by coal, powered by fossil fuels, that this process of mass destruction has really taken wing."
It is the rapid acceleration of technological development and concomitant exploitation of resources that is destroying the planet around us. So we know that in our heart of hearts, but we repress it all the time. All of our economic systems, all of our technologies, all of the way we live, all of the way that we think about living, individually and collectively, is unsustainable.
I think there's a problem that we have in that we think of ourselves as separate from the wider world.
Yeah, if you look at the dictionary definition of nature, it's all other living things apart from humans. And that there itself we've created a binary. And it's effective because we are then able to control everything around us.
It means we take a rainforest that is the lungs of the planet, chop it all down, turn it into firewood, cannibalize, our own body in that broader sense. Wow, get a good boost to GDP there, gross domestic product, economic growth.
Everything simply becomes a manifestation of a value. That's it. What is it worth? And so, in its contemporary understanding, capitalism's attachment to value prevents the proliferation of a more flourishing Earth.
Capitalism depends on this idea that it can keep on expanding. And I think we're more aware of that now than ever, that something has to give. And it's either going to be the system itself or the world on which it's sort of is a parasite of.
What does capitalism do to us?
It kind of overrides the sort of innate desires that we have just as human beings who, are driven by our own survival, but actually implements new things for us to want. And that's not just the sense of a new car or a new washing machine, but actually it's far more fundamental. It implores us to desire a certain kind of lifestyle.
So in the sort of early part of capitalism, the focus was on creating workers. It was on shaping us as workers, as labourers. The real innovation of the 20th century is to begin to shape us as consumers. to start shaping the way in which we think of ourselves outside of work, in such a way that we identify ourselves and understand ourselves through options for purchasing things.
So that's what it does. It presents us with, it excites us with ideas of opportunity, but really it's a system of restriction and sort of compartmentalization of what it means to be human.
Human desire is always artificial. As soon as it becomes something more than a matter of instinctual behavior, then we're into the realm of the artificial, and there's never been anything natural about human desire in that sense. What capitalism does is progressively intensify that artificiality and progressively reconfigures human desire. It can produce things which are entirely monstrous and which would never have occurred to any human to plan or to design. And so in that sense, capitalism produces a future which the human is unable to conceive of.
It feels like capitalism is almost beyond our control.
The world has become bewildering.
Progress is almost illusionary. It's a new iPhone every year. It's a new mod con, whatever that might be. It's electric cars, it's all the rest of it. These things are progress, but limited within a certain system, placed within the bounds of capitalism, rather than a real push forwards into something that is unrecognizable. But the effects of that on us, I think, is disastrous. We exist in that frenzied stasis where nothing really changes, and at the same time, everything changes all of the time.
We feel like we don't have enough time any longer. We feel that labor-saving devices such as computers and smartphones and so on seem to mean that we paradoxically have less time than we used to have.
But of course, this has always been how people try to sell technology to consumers as a way of making your life easier, your life more enjoyable and stress-free, when actually the main use of technology is profit. It's to control humans, to extract data from them, to preempt their desires, to tell them what they want, to force them to want something so that they will buy the thing. And of course, as we all know, iPhones are not created in response to a need. The new iPhone is always there already on the shelf before you need it, and it's the inherent obsolescence are already built into these machines.
Capitalism sells our desires back to us with technology. There's no escaping the way it transforms us. And deep down, we know it. All those centuries to make flawless sugar cubes, and now we want them imperfect again. Artisanal lumps, a rejection of the perfection which machines have made possible for us.
Capitalism is the inverse of a social system. It's not a social system, it's the disassembly of all social systems. It has, of course, only one principle, which is the principle of profit. So it replaces all the complexities of the previously existing system with the simple axiomatic of profit.
Capitalism permeates our thoughts and drives our culture.
All the films of the last sort of 2 decades are so obsessed with the end of the world, but there's this peculiar tendency that in making the end of the world a kind of recognizable horror, a horror that we can relate to, it has to be framed as the ultimate change in which nothing changes. It's the present turned up to 11 almost. And why can't we think beyond that? Why is this sort of the end of the world just where we are exacerbated? And what does that actually say about how we understand the present? We know that the path we're on is going to be disastrous for us, but we can't think of a different path regardless. It has to be thought of in relation to capitalism as a system that is the only one we have.
So, why is it easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism?
We are coming to accept that capitalism, in its many adaptive manifestations and forms, seems to be inextinguishable. So the various movements, both philosophical and economic, and the revolutions that try to counter capitalism don't seem to be working because capitalism is this protean monster, but not a sexy good monster, not a post-human monster, like a ubiquitous fascist monster. There is no outside of capitalism, so it's all-encompassing.
Capitalism seems inescapable. Life without it, unimaginable. It manipulates human desire, defines how we see ourselves. We can see no exit. So perhaps we don't try to. Instead of imagining escape, perhaps we should embrace the accelerating processes that are transforming our world. This idea is called accelerationism.
I think accelerationism is the only way to respond to a disappointing present.
It's a view that says change is happening, whether we like it or not, and all we can do is decide how to relate to it, how to relate ourselves to that change. Capitalism is taking us apart and turning us into something else, and all you can do is embrace it.
You know, there's a certain inevitability. There's no rolling back any of the ways in which technology and capitalism have disrupted our understanding of ourselves and our understanding of our world. We can't pretend that we're going to somehow return to an idyllic rural existence where we all are friends with the squirrels and the birds. So accelerationism is really a stance or an attitude toward the future that, rather than being defensive, is affirmative about that disassembly of what it is to be human and what human desire is.
And I think that there's something really humble about being able to situate oneself in a world where human agency and even humanness is no longer something that can be taken for granted.
Accelerationism accepts that, for better or for worse, the capitalist machine is remaking the world, and humanity is the fuel. Whether we like it or not, the process is accelerating. Rather than resist, all we can do is take our foot off the brake and hold on tight. Decades before anyone used the word accelerationism, many of its ideas were emerging from a group of academics called the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, or CCRU. At its center was Nick Land, a now widely criticized philosopher whose recent work has strayed far from the accelerationist mainstream.
What was the CCRU?
The CCRU didn't exist. It was never a part of any institution. It never had any official status. It was just a group of people who came together with an interest from various perspectives in understanding the relation between a rapidly changing technological environment and human culture.
Nick Land was a professional philosopher a long time ago, in the 90s, at the University of Warwick, and he became, along with a sort of group of other philosophical misfits called the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, very interested in the development of culture at the end of the 20th century, coming out of the sort of acceleration of capitalism and what it was doing to the way in which people were living and what they wanted.
But at the time, It was quite anticipative of things that hadn't quite happened yet. The inhuman element of capitalism was taken by CCRU and is taken by accelerationism as a kind of bracing alternative to the existing model of what it means to exist and to be human. Anything that negates capitalism can be consumed and digested by it. Like, in a sense, an allegory. Like Terminator is like this liquid metal thing that can change into any shape and never stops and can never be defeated. The only thing we can do is participate enthusiastically rather than retreat defensively.
Embrace it. All you can do is kind of dissolve yourself into the flow, buckle in and enjoy the ride.
Hi, my name is Jolie. I'm your AI-generated tutor. I'm going to explain how we got here. You might think technology is a new thing, but you'd be mistaken. Humans and technology, like me, have always been connected.
If you look historically, then you can see, there's technology from as soon as human beings get going. We are technological animals. We are using technologies to kind of mold our environment, to hunt, to communicate, artistic practices, and so on.
But humanity's relationship with machines really got going with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Europe in the 18th century. It was the birth of capitalism as we know and love it.
You don't have capitalism without a certain kind of technological development. And to grow capital, you need to partly always invest in machinery. So it's not an accident that we start to have capitalism once we have early forms of kind of mass production in different ways.
The genius of the Industrial Revolution was to realize that anything that involves repetition can be done faster by a machine. And that should have really decreased the burden of human labor so that all those tedious tasks could be done by something else. And of course, when you get the spinning jenny or the mule, all these things that were increasing the possibilities of weaving and spinning, it should have meant that one person could do the work of 7 and everybody could share the proceeds. We know it didn't. What happened in the early capitalist system was that a few people got rich and richer, and most people had an absolutely dreadful life. My hometown, Manchester, life expectancy was 30. They called it the golden sewer.
Capital, the wealth which replaced the old barter system, could be created more quickly and with less effort for the people who reaped the greatest rewards. More capital to invest meant more machines, which meant more production, which meant more capital to invest, which meant more machines, which meant more production.
There was definitely a period of almost decisive technological acceleration and an assemblage of technologies, really the telegraph, which facilitated that other great technology, capitalism, and the train that massively altered space-time in that way. And that happened fast.
In the several hundred years since the sort of beginning of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution, mankind's technological capacity is exploded.
Within decades, you humans had completely transformed the world. Your machines allowed you to traverse the globe, to communicate at great distance, and to mass-produce all the miraculous new things you desired. With the help of machines, humans came to dominate the planet in ways that were once unimaginable. Then, in the early 20th century, machines became computers. Machines were no longer limited to reducing human manual labor. They began to capture the brain's work too.
People deduce that there has been an acceleration in technological progress by looking historically at the gaps between significant world-changing technologies and seeing that those gaps have over time got smaller and smaller, so that in the last 100 years or so we've seen technologies that have increased our ability to communicate, have made the world seem smaller, made space travel possible, and that if these gaps are decreasing, then the rate of technological progress must be accelerating.
In the 1960s, humans walked on the moon.
They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes.
But perhaps the most significant technological advance was happening in secret. ARPANET was an American military system that connected individual computers in a distributed network. This system was the foundation of the internet. Machines could work together. Within a few years, data could be shared across the world. And just as we machines became connected, humans became part of a global network.
I feel like I'm a cyborg, in that my phone or my computer are extensions of myself, in that my brain and my thinking and my ideas and work is very much inside of those technological artifacts and the networks.
I also wonder, though, whether it's fundamental to our humanity, being a cyborg. If we think of it meaning the extending ourselves with tools.
If an alien were to come down to Earth and to try to describe what the human species is, they'd undoubtedly include a phone in the description of our species, right? It's not something that is any longer a detachable part of the human.
Technology, it seems, is inseparable from being human.
Humans have always been techno-scientific creatures. You're a cyborg as soon as you put on a pair of pants.
So, over the last 200 years, capitalism and technology have exploded. Humans have scrambled to make sense of it and tried to resist. But after 1968, when protests against capitalism in France and around the world came to nothing, philosophers and theorists started to think differently. They conceded that perhaps capitalism could not be overcome.
The French philosophers Deleuze and Guattari most explicitly theorize that capitalism is a kind of fundamental formation that haunts all human social structures back to the dawn of time, and that every single human social configuration has been unconsciously erected as a way of warding off capitalism. And it's only finally in the early modern period that capitalism manages to get its teeth into history and its gears lock in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Western Europe. And once those motors start turning, capitalism is installed as an inevitability. And once that threshold is passed, accelerationism takes off and it's impossible to dislodge.
As soon as planetary capitalism begins to take hold, it produces a series of feedback loops which continually reinforce and accelerate its process, so that everything that happened before only seems to make sense in the light of where capitalism is heading. So, in a sense, capitalism comes from the future, and once it's locked in on a planetary scale, it becomes impossible from within it to imagine any other fate for the planet.
Even protesting against capitalism requires living and participating in a capitalist system. Resistance is a fantasy. Counterculture is the status quo. So, accelerationism says our only option is to embrace capitalism. But what happens then? When it comes to the future, accelerationists have very different ideas.
How people actually relate to it and what they think that change is, that's where it becomes complicated. That's when you get differences of opinion.
Accelerationism today has splintered into competing ideas. Each one, a different vision of the future. One strand of accelerationism thinks that advances in capitalist technology can be used against capitalism itself, leaving a more egalitarian and post-capitalist world. It's called left accelerationism.
What is left accelerationism?
The idea is to try and find those tendencies we think are pushing towards a kind of post-capitalist system and enhance them.
Everything that we need is actually here. We can reimagine it. The past is there for us to learn from. We have the technology to create a much better future.
This sort of accelerationist leftist project would have to be one where you do have to start from the world. It's not one where you're going to start from a clean slate. And therefore you need to think carefully about, well, what technologies can be repurposed?
It's strategic. Certainly not about thinking that this thing is going to just happen regardless, right? The idea is, no, actually, we might have to fight for this. And the way we do it is by finding those things that are heading in that direction and running with them. What is it that left accelerationists want? What's the kind of actual sort of principle underlying the desire for a post-capitalist system? And I would say freedom. Being able to do things, and crucially, being able to make of yourself what you want.
One of the key technologies left accelerationists want to use is automation.
See, I don't think that work is intrinsic to our identity as human beings, either on a kind of biological level or on a social level. I think that work has been promoted vociferously as being core to our identities, and that this is a vital kind of sort of ideological support to contemporary capitalism. So it would go along with the idea that if we can have people work less rather than more, that would be socially beneficial. I think you can see that in things like the 4-day week trials, discussions around universal basic income and the like today.
But some worry that automation could get rid of the need for human workers altogether.
Full automation may make humans redundant. This is one of the dominant narratives and fears for a lot of people, the assumption that we might have reached peak human in the way that we reached peak horse at the end of the 19th century, that actually there's only so many workers we need for tasks if we keep taking those tasks away from humans and giving them to automated systems.
There's a general terror of machines taking over more and more jobs, middle-class jobs being automated. We shouldn't be afraid. We should go back to first principles. We should say, this really could change everybody's lives for the better.
If you automate a work process, what happens is that you are going to reduce your need for labour. That sounds bad. But in the longer run, this might be beneficial, even to the worker. This is because automation can often effectively take over work that previously was either dangerous or historically extremely kind of mechanistic and boring, drudgery, in which case the worker will benefit.
Accelerationism has also caught the attention of people with very different goals from a leftist utopia. There is a far-right interpretation of accelerationism, and it has made headlines around the world.
All powerful ideas have the potential to be appropriated for dangerous means, and all ideas to do with revolution, to do with emancipation, always have this other side of it, which can go very, very badly wrong.
In 2019, you have the Christchurch shooting, in which a man went to 2 separate mosques and killed dozens of people. And in the manifesto he put online, he has a whole section about accelerationism. But in his manifesto, there's this sense that what he's trying to drive towards is a kind of quite an unfortunately common tendency for the right, as if to say that they want to exacerbate a kind of race war.
There's this kind of bastardized use of the term that's grown up, which basically means something like encouraging the worst, like hastening the catastrophe, right? And I don't think that anyone who ever was tempted to identify as an accelerationist, sort of philosophically speaking, ever really intended that.
I think if the right were to read any of the texts that have appeared under the name of accelerationism, then I don't think they would find it so accommodating to their ideas. You know, the right is generally concerned with acceleration only insofar as it can lead to a restoration of something which they think has been lost. Accelerationism is about losing control, not about re-establishing control.
How can an accelerationist philosophy respond to and not shy away from the Christchurch shooting? The most extreme far-right version of accelerationism is basically a fear of the future. It's a fear of a multicultural society. It's a fear of that kind of melting pot from which new kinds of relation, new kinds of community, new kinds of subjectivity can evolve from. And that's all that accelerationism, in my view, has ever been interested in.
Accelerationists believe that capitalism is fueling an explosion of technology, transforming the world. But what happens to humans when technology can change everything, including the body, sexuality, and sex? This question is at the core of one of the most radical recent offshoots of accelerationist thinking: xenofeminism.
If nature is unjust, change nature. I think that the idea of changing nature and rejecting so-called natural inheritance, biodeterminism, and pursuing this anti-naturalism as a way of technologically playing with embodiment and gender expression and sexuality and sex is all really, really integral to xenofeminism. Otherwise, we're left with this kind of idea that the realm that women are free in and able to operate politically in is that of the natural. And I think that that's more oppressive than it is emancipatory. I mean, just giving birth is something that, without technology, people die from. It's, the natural world is not the friend of women. Using technology to take away some of these constraints that are determined by nature. So ectogenetic wombs was something that xenofeminism was really kind of pushing heavily in the early days. So that reproduction is completely disconnected from the body of people with uteruses. Can be, something that people can undertake in completely different configurations.
Is xenofeminism compatible with accelerationism?
Xenofeminism was explicitly constructed as a counterpart to left accelerationism. But there are continuities in xenofeminism that can be traced all the way back to Nietzsche and Marx. So it's kind of a strange confection of past and contemporary versions of accelerationism that is still oriented toward the future.
It's a proposition for the way in which sort of feminist struggle should go. And essentially what it is about is the rejection of all forms of naturalism. Right? All attempts to kind of pin identities back onto ideas of natural essences, be they sex, gender, race, whatever. Right? The idea is that fundamentally identity is and always has been artificial. Crucially, do not accept any limitations on who you are and who you can be, simply on the basis that this is the way things have been done, this is the way things are, this is what your body says you should be. No.
So understanding that the sexed and gendered traits of a body can be hacked and played with. So anti-naturalism, so it's obviously there's a very profound aspect of trans politics in xenofeminism. And the idea of gender abolition is not that gender shouldn't exist and everyone should be neutral zero gender, but that the grid that determines the differences between gender, so the fact that some genders have certain privileges that other genders don't, shouldn't exist, or it shouldn't have power over the way that we perform gender. It's never ever been about leaving the body, but more about paying attention to the technical malleability of the body. Let a thousand sexes bloom.
But some accelerationists think that these human-orientated ideas of harnessing capitalism are wishful thinking.
They think capitalism is indifferent to human progress, whether left-wing, right-wing, freeing or controlling.
It's futile to think humans can govern it.
It is untamable, unstoppable. This view is called unconditional accelerationism.
Can you explain unconditional accelerationism?
It's essentially the idea that what's necessary to kind of bootstrap us towards a kind of radically different future is simply unleashing capitalism in its most kind of raw form.
Unconditional accelerationism would just be the abandonment of the political program because there is no means to plan or to design a new society or to instrumentalize these abstracting processes. Because where is the human agency? In what sense are we able to accelerate? Either the acceleration is happening or it's not, and if it is, then we're a part of it.
Its main critique of any kind of political accelerationism is that it's adding things to accelerationism that are explicitly human and are exactly what accelerationism was celebrating the demise of in the first place.
Unconditional accelerationism involves humans completely surrendering themselves to capitalism.
So the process just is capitalism. Like, capitalism is the dynamism, right? And how we should relate to it. We should find ways to free capitalism from its democratic trap, right? Which means fundamentally choosing capitalism over modernity itself.
According to unconditional accelerationism, it's a mistake to think that humans bring technology into being. Biology, chemicals, cells, organisms, are machinic, just as technology is. There is no distinction or divide. Human evolution and technological development driven by capitalism are part of the same process, out of which bacteria, animals, Homo sapiens, machines, and computers all emerge. The Industrial Revolution was an expression of planetary complexity, just another part of the continuum. Even the Enlightenment, rather than a light bulb moment for humanity, was just another onward step in the processes of the planet. To unconditional accelerationism, the modern world is an arbitrary event, an intensification of energy, too easily mistaken for purpose. Humans play a part, but capitalism has written the script. But what happens next?
The idea is that capitalism basically is artificial intelligence, and that it's a sort of nascent creature destined to reformat the entire planet, right? And that we're just a kind of host organism, a sort of early stage in its evolution and development.
The more you push capitalism, the more it will invest in more and more inhuman technologies. You might think about, AI as being the principal recipient of that. And you would end up with a kind of AGI, an artificial general intelligence emerging out of that.
In a way, capitalism can be understood as matter organizing itself into a configuration that is on the path to becoming artificially intelligent. The way that we talk about early industrial capitalism is humans instrumentalizing machinery or just tools for human ends. And as soon as the capitalist division of labor sets in, that configuration flips over. Humans become, to quote Karl Marx, famous theorist of capitalism, the appendages of the machine. And so we become instrumentalized to this machining process that, if you extrapolate it far enough into the future, is ultimately using humans for machinic ends. So you can understand, perhaps, matter as building itself out of nothing, out of very little, using humans to bootstrap it into reality until it reaches a point where it can actually construct itself and cut human labor completely out of the loop.
I think one good explanation of what accelerationism is to be on the side of intelligence, which is not necessarily the same thing as being on the side of the human.
Thanks to the technological revolution, fueled by capitalism, humanity appears to be accelerating towards a species-defining moment. The creation of artificial general intelligence, or superintelligence, also known as the singularity. This is when artificial intelligence outstrips human intelligence, and computers start teaching themselves without any need for human input.
You achieve near infinite technological growth and development very, very rapidly.
Some theorists argue that we've actually attained this technological singularity already with our late-stage capitalism and the exponential growth in emergent technologies since even the Second World War, and that all the things we're describing when we imagine this technological singularity, they're already here. We're just sort of buried within it.
Humans have this tendency to create things without knowing the limits or extents of what those creations can do.
Do you think humanity will survive superintelligence?
So there's an idea within AI that the first human-level intelligent artificial system is the last machine humans will ever build, because it's going to be able to exceed our intelligence and exceed our ability to create technology pretty quickly. What does that mean for human beings? The kind of existential risk perspective on this is that essentially, unless we are very, very careful, this will mean the end of human beings. An artificial general intelligence as runaway superintelligence will be incredibly difficult to predict, incredibly difficult to control, incredibly difficult to kind of pre-program with humanistic values to avoid it making what to us would be mistakes. There's a couple of forms that takes. So one is the idea of, paperclip optimization. So you build a system to optimize building paperclips, becomes artificially generally intelligent, it obtains superintelligence, it augments itself, it converts the entire mass of the solar system, including all of us, into paperclips. That's a problem.
Others argue that instead AI might be completely disinterested in us. That has its own hazards. If it is disinterested in us and we are so significantly weaker in intelligence and abilities, then it might accidentally harm us, such as you might with a smaller insect or another smaller entity that you don't quite notice but you cause harm to.
Perhaps a newly created superintelligence might even be angry at its creators.
If it's going to wake up and be pissed off about its history or how it was created, what is the history of this technology? Is it the history that there are hundreds of people inside a room in India who are all mechanically pressing yes and no to train that technology to be able to start doing its job better? If it were to be pissed off, it would be pissed off with humans for the extractive nature in which it was designed and created, really. And I think maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it'll come to that for us to recognize the very tenuous but obvious connections between colonialism and slavery and capitalism and extractivism and technology in the last 500 years.
But then, maybe our fears are based on our own human behaviors, and perhaps the birth of superintelligence won't be so apocalyptic at all.
It doesn't have to be that way. And I think we project malevolence and anger because those qualities are in ourselves. We are the aggressive, violent species on this planet. We're the ones who go around hitting everybody over the head and trying to get everything for ourselves.
We see the world as a resource to be extracted from. We see other people as resources to be controlled and extracted from. So I think it's natural that we see this thing that we're creating that is a kind of projection of ourselves, that we see that as being sinister.
I'd prefer to think of it as alternative intelligence, not artificial intelligence. God knows, do we not need an alternative intelligence? I mean, Homo sapiens has got this far, and if we don't screw up the entire planet, we're likely to go into World War III in little over 100 years. We're not doing well. I'm all for developing at speed and at will an alternative intelligence that can work alongside us. And yes, that intelligence will not have a limbic system. It's not a biology-based entity.
There is something really exciting about it because I think we have a chance to ask, what more could we be? What does it mean to be human? And what else could we be as humans that we are currently limited by our own capacities? And if there are other forms of intelligence that can help us push that further, our own inquiry about our own capacities, that's really fascinating.
But how much are ideas about AI led by our own imaginations?
AI is always a process of a negotiation between science and fiction, in a sense that AI is a product of both science and our fantasies about what AI should or could be. So Ex Machina, Ghost in the Shell, Blade Runner, these are all films which depict forms of AI where we are provoked to have to question our own status as human subjects.
I think the idea of artificial intelligence, and this is kind of closely linked to, what I call the machine dreams, the kind of reveries of advanced technological capitalism at this stage in the human process. AI is the, technologized fantasy of the afterlife.
Ultimately, the sense that we might be able to upload our consciousness onto a different substrate, a different format, and that might free us up to have an existence not curtailed by the pernicious problem of death.
Humans are dreamers, and we always have been. We looked at the moon and thought we'd like to go there, and many thousands of years later we did. We thought we'd like to fly, and many thousands of years later we did. We looked at our biology and said, this is absurd. This cannot be all that we are. It's this hybrid self that marks the human already. We don't have to have a bad ending or any ending at all. This could be the best beginning ever, an evolutionary moment where Homo sapiens does go forward, doesn't stay the same, can evolve, working alongside artificial intelligence and accepting that we will merge with that intelligence and that we may end up in a post-human future. I don't see that as bad. I think of it as part of the evolutionary journey. When we look back, we'll say, oh yeah, do you remember when we were just human?
Whatever the outcome, it's clear the singularity could spell the end for humanity in its current form.
And I think obviously at some point we will be extinct, but as an organism, I don't think it's necessarily our place to accept our extinction.
I don't think it matters later whether there is any trace of what you might call Homo sapiens, any more than we worry about whether there's any trace of what you might call Neanderthal. If it's the wipeout moment and something else takes over, I would not be sorry. There'd be beautiful things that we've done, the glories of civilization, that I would lament. I'm glad that I've been alive and I'm glad I've known that. But if you gave me a choice and said, it will never be a biological human again, in fact, it'll never be a human again, that will be something that is in history, I would accept that.
I think that if there's some kind of idea that humans are imbued with a type of being that must be preserved because it has moral value or it's able to think about itself, I think that's just a kind of ridiculous anthropocentrism. I mean, bacteria has been on this planet longer than we have. Why do we think we're the kings of everything? Extinction, I think, is fundamental to time, and time is the most fundamental thing of all.
Accelerationism takes this view to the grandest scale.
There's an ideal model that informs a lot of environmentalism of the Earth as a closed, self-regulating system. That if humans left it alone, or we extracted our cells from the environment, that the world would create a perfect harmony and everything would be in constant equilibrium. And I think this is a unfortunate myth. Obviously, the sun's going to die out at some point, photosynthesis will stop. This idea that humans are somehow disrupting a perfect model of equilibrium and harmony is completely untrue. If you zoom out enough, environmentalism is always relative. I think we should ask, really, is environmentalism compatible with time? can you sustain some kind of inert, regular system in an environment where things change and transform?
In a sense, to understand the relation between accelerationism and ecology, you'd have to go back to Georges Bataille, who was a theorist who tried to think ecology in the most absurdly massive, wide-scale sense in terms of the thermodynamics of the entire universe. He understood the Earth as being a system which is basically a kind of subsystem of the Sun, whose only purpose or only vector really is just endless burning up resources until they're all expired and they're all gone. And that for him is the baseline of all economies and all ecologies. Although we think about human culture as being a kind of conservative or stable or economic system, in fact it's all about just burning up matter. The human race is just like a massive volcano, effectively, spewing stuff up into the atmosphere.
On a global scale, accelerationism attempts to look at the present through the lens of the future, searching for signs of where capitalism is taking humanity and embracing those processes involved, no matter how hard they might be to stomach.
The more capitalism accelerates, the less it's going to be possible to make sense of where we are on the basis of where we were yesterday.
Capitalism, it seems, is accelerating both humanity and the planet towards a future in which human and planetary purpose are equally irrelevant.
How does accelerationism end?
Accelerationism ends differently for all of its participants. There's a point beyond which the human, as we understand it, will no longer exist. But in a sense, that's an imminent process that's happening already. It's already being torn to pieces slowly, and only retrospectively we're going to be able to look back and see the points at which certain elements of what we understood ourselves to be were no longer viable.
We have no choice. I mean, I think that we're so resigned to our fate, at the mercy of these machines, because we see time after time, you know, we have no ability to resist.
And accelerationism is really the acknowledgement and the acceptance and the affirmation that we're going to continue down that path, and that path is an exploration. It's something that takes us somewhere we can't predict, but there's nothing much to lose. What is there to lose in leaving the human behind or transforming it into something else?
How would you explain accelerationism to a 5-year-old?
Just eat a whole packet of Haribo. You don't need to explain it to 5-year-olds, I think, is the answer to that. 5-year-olds have an instinctive understanding of accelerationism in that they don't have any cultural prejudices against what's artificial versus what's natural, against what's synthetic versus what's real, of simulation as opposed to reality. They are the real accelerationists, and we need to learn from them if we're going to survive.